In the quiet town of Willow Creek, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed hedges, colorful flower beds, and rows of houses that all looked like they belonged in a postcard. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved hello every morning, kids played tag until sunset, and everyone seemed to know each other's names, or at least their dogs. People here prided themselves on keeping things tidy, orderly, and harmonious. And if there was one thing that kept this harmony intact, it was the Homeowners Association, HOA. The HOA ruled over Willow Creek with an invisible but firm hand. They had rules for everything: how tall your grass could grow before you got fined, what color your front door should be painted, and even how many holiday decorations you could hang without needing special permission. Most residents accepted these rules as part of living in such a beautiful community, but not everyone saw eye to eye with the HOA, and certainly not with Karen Whitmore. Karen was the self-appointed queen bee of the HOA. She wore her role like a badge of honor, strutting around the neighborhood with a clipboard tucked under her arm and a smug smile plastered across her face. To Karen, enforcing the HOA's guidelines wasn't just a duty, it was her life's mission. If someone dared to paint their mailbox blue instead of white, Karen would swoop in faster than anyone thought possible. Armed with warning letters and thinly veiled threats, her reputation preceded her, and most people avoided crossing her path whenever they could. Enter Alex Carter, a hardworking single father who had recently moved into the neighborhood with his two children, Emma and Jake. For years, Alex had dreamed of owning a home where his kids could play safely outside and he could finally feel settled. After a long stretch of moving from apartment to apartment, when he found the cozy little house on Maple Lane, it felt perfect, spacious enough for his family, close to good schools, and surrounded by friendly faces. Alex threw himself into making the house feel like home. He spent weekends painting walls, planting flowers, and fixing up the backyard so Emma and Jake would have plenty of space to run around. One project, however, proved trickier than the rest: the garage. The original structure was too small to fit both his car and all the tools and bikes his family needed, so Alex decided to extend it by a few extra feet, a decision that seemed harmless at the time. What Alex didn't realize was that even minor changes to a property required approval from the HOA. In his defense, he hadn't received any information about this when he bought the house. The previous owner hadn't mentioned it either, and Alex assumed that as long as the extension looked neat and blended well with the rest of the house, no one would care. Unfortunately for him, Karen Whitmore cared very much. It started with a polite letter slipped into Alex's mailbox one sunny afternoon. Written in formal language, the note informed him that his garage extension violated Section 4.2 of the HOA's architectural guidelines. It politely requested that he remove the unauthorized addition within 2 weeks or face further action. At first, Alex chuckled at the formality of it all. Surely something so minor wouldn't cause a fuss, right? Wrong. Over the next few days, more letters arrived, each one escalating in tone. The second letter warned of potential fines. The third outright accused Alex of deliberate disregard for community standards. By the fourth letter, Karen had taken to signing off with phrases like, "This is your final warning." Alex tried to ignore them, hoping the whole thing would blow over. After all, his garage extension barely stuck out. It was functional, practical, and honestly, nobody else seemed bothered by it. Or so he thought. One evening, Alex attended an HOA meeting to address the issue directly. He figured that if he explained his situation calmly and rationally, maybe Karen and the board members would understand. He walked into the community center feeling optimistic, ready to make his case. What he encountered, however, was far from welcoming. The room buzzed with tension as Alex introduced himself and began speaking. He talked about how much the house meant to him and his family, how the garage extension was necessary for their day-to-day lives, and how he genuinely hadn't known about the approval process. Before he could finish, Karen interrupted him, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're breaking the rules, Mr. Carter," she said sharply, tapping her pen against the table for emphasis. "Rules exist for a reason. If we let one person get away with ignoring them, then what's next? People painting their roofs neon green? Installing wind turbines in their backyards? Her words drew nervous laughter from some of the attendees, but Alex felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. He tried to respond, but Karen cut him off again, launching into a lecture about responsibility and setting a good example for the neighborhood. By the end of the meeting, Alex left feeling defeated and deeply annoyed. Karen handed him a final ultimatum: tear down the extension within 30 days or face legal consequences. As Alex drove home that night, his mind raced with frustration. Why was Karen making such a big deal out of something so small? Wasn't there room for compromise? More importantly, why did she seem to enjoy wielding her power so much? Little did Alex know, this was only the beginning of his troubles. Karen Whitmore wasn't the type to back down easily, and she had plans that would soon turn Alex's world upside down. The warning letters kept coming, each one more aggressive than the last. At first, Alex tried to brush them off, telling himself that Karen Whitmore was just blowing hot air. But as the stack of envelopes on his kitchen counter grew taller, he realized this wasn't going to go away anytime soon. The HOA's demands were relentless: remove the garage extension immediately, or face escalating fines and potential legal action. What had started as a minor oversight was quickly spiraling into something much bigger and far more personal. Alex couldn't help but feel like he was being singled out. He drove around the neighborhood one Saturday morning, taking note of other homes. Sure enough, he spotted plenty of unapproved additions: extra flower beds, backyard sheds, even a basketball hoop mounted on someone's driveway. None of these seemed to attract Karen's wrath. Why then was she so fixated on his garage? It didn't make sense, or at least, not in a way that felt fair. Determined to resolve the issue, Alex decided to attend another HOA meeting. This time he came prepared. He printed copies of photos showing his garage extension from various angles, highlighting how seamlessly it blended with the rest of the house. He wrote down talking points, rehearsing what he would say until he felt confident. If Karen wanted to play hardball, Alex figured he might as well step up to the plate. When the day of the meeting arrived, Alex walked into the community center feeling cautiously optimistic. The room was already filled with residents chatting quietly among themselves. Some nodded politely when they saw him, while others avoided eye contact altogether. Karen sat at the head of the table, her clipboard clutched tightly in her hands. She glanced up briefly as Alex entered, her lips curling into a faint smirk before returning to her notes. As the meeting began, Karen took charge, leading discussions about upcoming neighborhood events and landscaping guidelines. When it was finally Alex's turn to speak, he stood up and cleared his throat. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay calm. He introduced himself again, explaining that he had recently moved to Willow Creek and was eager to be a good neighbor. Then he launched into his explanation. "The garage extension I added is functional and necessary for my family," Alex said, holding up the photos. "It doesn't change the appearance of the house significantly, and it certainly doesn't harm anyone. I understand there's a process for getting approval, but I genuinely wasn't aware of it when I made the modification. I'm happy to work with the HOA to ensure everything is compliant moving forward." For a moment, the room fell silent. Alex looked around, hoping to see nods of agreement or even sympathy. Instead, most people avoided his gaze, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Karen leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice dripping with condescension, "rules are rules. You can't simply ignore them because you weren't aware. That's not how communities function. If we allow exceptions for one person, where does it end?" Her words hit like a punch to the gut. Alex felt his confidence waver, but he pressed on. "I'm not asking for an exception," he replied. "I'm asking for understanding. This isn't malicious, it's practical. My kids need space to store their bikes, and I need room for tools. Isn't the point of the HOA to foster harmony, not create conflict?" Karen's eyes narrowed and she tapped her pen against the table, a habit Alex was beginning to recognize as a sign of irritation. "Harmony comes from following the guidelines," she shot back. "Your disregard for the rules disrupts that harmony. We've given you multiple opportunities to rectify the situation, yet you refuse to comply. Do you think you're above the law, Mr. Carter? The question hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Alex opened his mouth to respond, but Karen didn't. Give him a chance. She turned to the other board members, addressing them directly. If we let this slide, what message are we sending? That it's okay to flout the rules whenever it's convenient. Is that the kind of precedent we want to set? Her tone left no room for debate. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, clearly reluctant to challenge her. One by one, they murmured their agreement, nodding along as Karen outlined the consequences. Escalating fines starting at $500 per week, followed by legal action if the extension wasn't removed within 30 days. By the time the meeting adjourned, Alex felt utterly defeated. Driving home that evening, Alex replayed the scene in his mind over and over. How had things escalated so quickly? He hadn't intended to cause trouble. He'd simply wanted to improve his property for his family. Yet here he was, branded as some kind of rule-breaking rebel, all because of a few extra feet of concrete and drywall. Back at home, Alex found himself pacing the living room, trying to figure out his next move. Emma and Jake were upstairs playing video games, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing downstairs. He didn't want to involve them in this mess, but the thought of tearing down the garage extension weighed heavily on him. It wasn't just about the money, it was about principle. Wasn't there a way to stand up to Karen without burning bridges with the entire neighborhood? His frustration boiled over when he checked the mail later that night. Another envelope from the HOA lay waiting for him, its contents predictable yet infuriating. Inside was yet another warning letter, this one accompanied by a detailed breakdown of the fines he'd incur if he failed to comply. Alex crumpled the paper in his fist and tossed it onto the counter, muttering under his breath. That's when inspiration struck. Maybe he could fight back, but not alone. Alex remembered hearing stories about neighbors banding together to challenge unreasonable HOA decisions. Perhaps he could rally support from others who had also felt the sting of Karen's iron-fisted rule. After all, he couldn't be the only one who thought she was taking things too far. Over the next few days, Alex made it a point to strike up conversations with his neighbors. He started small, complimenting their gardens or asking about their weekend plans. Slowly, he worked his way toward the topic of the HOA. To his surprise, many shared his frustrations. Some admitted they'd received similar letters for minor infractions, while others confessed they were tired of Karen's constant nitpicking. A few even hinted that they'd love to see someone stand up to her, but none were willing to take the risk themselves. Despite the lack of outright support, Alex felt a spark of hope. If nothing else, he now knew he wasn't entirely alone. Armed with renewed determination, he decided to dig deeper. He spent hours poring over the HOA's guidelines, searching for loopholes or inconsistencies. He reached out to friends outside the neighborhood, seeking advice from those who had dealt with similar situations. One friend suggested documenting everything, every letter, every conversation, every interaction with Karen. Paper trails are powerful, they told him. You never know when you'll need proof. Meanwhile, Karen continued her campaign against Alex. She began patrolling the neighborhood more frequently, often stopping by his house to check on the status of the garage extension. Each visit felt like a power play, designed to intimidate him into submission. Once, she even brought along another HOA board member, presumably to reinforce her authority. Alex gritted his teeth and played nice, knowing that losing his temper would only give her more ammunition. But beneath his calm exterior, Alex's mind was racing. He knew he needed a plan, and fast. The 30-day deadline loomed closer with each passing day, and the pressure was mounting. As much as he hated to admit it, Karen had the upper hand, for now. But Alex was determined to change that. He refused to let her win no matter what it took. Little did he know, Karen was about to escalate things in a way that would shock the entire neighborhood and push Alex to his breaking point. It was a chilly Friday night, and Alex had finally settled into bed after a long week. The kids were asleep upstairs and the house was quiet, just the way he liked it. For once, his mind wasn't racing with thoughts of Karen Whitmore or the HOA's endless demands. He'd spent the evening researching legal options and drafting letters to send to the board members, hoping to reason with them one last time before the 30-day deadline expired. Exhausted but determined, Alex drifted, off to sleep, unaware that his world was about to be turned upside down. Around midnight, a loud crash jolted him awake. At first he thought it might be thunder, but the sound was too sharp, too deliberate. His heart pounding, Alex grabbed his phone and stumbled out of bed, pulling on a hoodie as he made his way downstairs. Another crash echoed through the air, this time accompanied by the unmistakable whirring of machinery. Throwing open the front door, Alex froze in disbelief at what he saw. Under the dim glow of the streetlights, a forklift was tearing into his garage like a bulldozer plowing through drywall. Shards of wood and metal flew everywhere as the machine rammed into the structure again and again. Standing behind the controls, illuminated by the headlights of her car parked nearby, was none other than Karen Whitmore herself. Dressed in reflective, safety gear and a hard hat, she looked every bit the part of a construction worker, except for the smug grin plastered across her face. Alex's jaw dropped. "What are you doing?" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. Karen didn't respond. Instead, she revved the forklift and drove it straight into the side of the garage, sending chunks of concrete crumbling to the ground. The noise woke up Emma and Jake, who appeared at the doorway in their pajamas, wide-eyed and terrified. Neighbors began poking their heads out of windows and stepping onto porches drawn by the commotion. Some stared in stunned silence. Others pulled out their phones to record the chaos unfolding before them. "Karen, stop this right now," Alex yelled, running toward her. But she ignored him, completely focused on her mission. With each pass of the forklift, more of the garage collapsed until there was almost nothing left standing. By the time she finally shut off the engine, Alex's property resembled a demolition site. Splintered wood, twisted metal, and shattered glass littered the driveway, glinting ominously under the pale moonlight. Breathing heavily, Karen climbed out of the forklift and strode over to Alex, her expression triumphant. "Consider this your final warning," she said coolly, brushing dust off her gloves. "The HOA gave you plenty of chances to fix this yourself. Since you refused, I took matters into my own hands." Alex could hardly believe what he was hearing. "You can't just destroy someone's property like this," he sputtered, gesturing wildly at the wreckage. "This is insane." Karen smirked, clearly enjoying the moment. "Oh, but I can," she replied. "I have permission from the HOA board. Everything I'm doing is within the rules." Before Alex could respond, sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have called the police. Karen didn't seem fazed in the slightest. She leaned casually against the hood of her car, watching as flashing red and blue lights flooded the street. Officers arrived moments later, taking in the scene, with wide eyes. They approached Alex first, asking him to explain what had happened. Still reeling, Alex pointed at Karen. "She did this," he exclaimed. "She showed up in the middle of the night with a forklift and destroyed my garage." The officers turned to Karen, who produced a folder of documents seemingly out of nowhere. "Everything I did tonight was approved by the HOA," she stated confidently, handing the papers to the officers. "Mr. Carter has been in violation of our guidelines for weeks. When he failed to comply, we took necessary action." One of the officers skimmed through the documents, his brow furrowing. "Ma'am, even if you had permission, this seems excessive," he said hesitantly. "Destroying property without due process isn't something we can overlook." Karen crossed her arms, her confidence unwavering. "Then take it up with the HOA board," she snapped. "I'm simply following orders." As the officers conferred quietly among themselves, Alex felt a surge of anger unlike anything he'd ever experienced. How could anyone think this was acceptable? He glanced around at the growing crowd of neighbors searching for support, or at least some sign of outrage. To his dismay, most people avoided meeting his gaze, retreating back into their homes as quickly as they'd emerged. Only a handful stayed to watch, their expressions unreadable. When the officers finally turned back to address the situation, They informed Karen that while the matter would need further investigation, she couldn't leave the scene until everything was documented. Alex, meanwhile, was advised to file a formal complaint and gather evidence of the damage. As the reality of the situation sank in, Alex realized this wasn't just about his garage anymore. This was personal. Karen had crossed a line, and she needed to be held accountable. The next morning, Alex surveyed the destruction in the harsh light of day. What remained of his garage looked like something out of a disaster movie. Tools and bikes lay scattered among the debris, ruined beyond repair. The sight filled him with a mix of sadness and fury. He called a friend who worked in construction to assess the cost of repairs, which turned out to be far higher than he'd anticipated. Rebuilding the garage would drain his savings, leaving little room for emergencies or future expenses. Determined not to let Karen get away with what she'd done, Alex decided to escalate the situation. He filed a police report detailing the events of the previous night, attaching photos of the damage and screenshots of the threatening letters he'd received from the HOA. He also reached out to local news outlets, hoping to bring attention to Karen's outrageous behavior. If she thought she could intimidate him into submission, she was sorely mistaken, but the battle wasn't going to be easy. Later that afternoon, Alex received a call from one of the HOA board members, a man named Greg, who had always struck him as reasonable. Greg apologized profusely for Karen's actions, claiming she had acted without official approval, despite what she'd told the police. According to him, the board had authorized only a formal notice of non-compliance, not outright destruction. Still, he urged Alex to consider settling the matter privately rather than pursuing legal action. "I know Karen can be difficult," Greg admitted reluctantly, "but dragging this into court will only make things worse for everyone. Can we find a compromise?" Alex wanted to scream. A compromise? After everything Karen had done? He thanked Greg for reaching out but made it clear that he wasn't backing down. If the HOA expected him to forgive and forget, they had another thing coming. That evening, Alex sat at his kitchen table surrounded by paperwork. Letters from the HOA, copies of the police report, estimates for repairs. It all felt overwhelming. Just when he thought things couldn't get any crazier, his phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from an unknown number. "You don't know who you're messing with. Back off or you'll regret it." Alex stared at the message, a chill running down his spine. Was this Karen's attempt to scare him? Or was someone else involved? Either way, it only strengthened his resolve. He wasn't going to let fear dictate his decisions. If anything, the text served as proof that Karen's antics were spiraling out of control, and that she needed to be stopped before she hurt someone else. Little did Alex know, help was closer than he realized. Over the weekend, he received an unexpected visit from his estranged uncle, Judge Henry Carter. The two hadn't spoken much in years, their relationship strained by past disagreements. But when Alex explained everything that had happened, the letters, the meetings, the forklift attack, Henry listened intently, his expression growing darker with each detail. "This isn't just about your garage," Henry said, finally shaking his head. "This woman has a history of abusing her power. Years ago, I presided over a case involving her. She tried to sue a neighbor over a tree branch hanging over her fence. Lost spectacularly, of course, but she never let it go. Sounds like she hasn't changed one bit." For the first time in days, Alex felt a flicker of hope. With his uncle's guidance, maybe he stood a chance of fighting back, not just for himself but for the entire neighborhood. Together, they began crafting a plan to hold Karen accountable and expose the flaws in the HOA's enforcement practices. Justice might be slow, but Alex was determined to see it through. And so as the sun set over Willow Creek, Alex found himself preparing for the fight of his life. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but one thing was certain. Karen Whitmore had no idea what she was in for. The weekend after the forklift fiasco, Alex's estranged uncle, Judge Henry Carter, arrived at his doorstep. It wasn't a planned visit. Alex had called him out of sheer desperation, hoping to get some advice on how to handle Karen Whitmore and the HOA mess. To his surprise, Henry showed up in person, driving a sleek black sedan that looked like it belonged in a lawyer's parking lot, rather than the quiet streets of Willow Creek. Henry was a tall man with sharp features, silver, hair neatly combed back, and an air of authority that seemed to command respect wherever he went. He stepped out of the car wearing a tailored suit, looking every bit the retired judge he was. Alex greeted him awkwardly, unsure of what to expect. Their relationship had been strained for years, mostly due to misunderstandings and differing life choices. But now, standing face to face, there was no time for old grudges. Alex needed help, and Henry, sensing the gravity of the situation, was ready to step in. They sat down at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of papers, letters from the HOA, photos of the demolished garage, estimates for repairs, and screenshots of threatening texts. Henry listened intently as Alex recounted the entire ordeal, from the initial warning letters to Karen's late-night rampage with the forklift. At first, Henry's expression remained neutral, but as Alex described Karen's behavior, his uncle's jaw tightened and his eyes narrowed. When Alex finished speaking, there was a long pause. Henry leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers against the edge of the table. "This isn't just about your garage," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. "This woman has a history of vindictiveness. She doesn't play fair, and she certainly doesn't know when to stop." Alex blinked in surprise. "You've dealt with her before?" Henry nodded slowly. "Years ago, I presided over a case involving Karen. It was a property dispute. Something ridiculous, really. A neighbor's tree branch hung slightly over her fence and she tried to sue them for damages. Claimed it was ruining her view or some nonsense." He chuckled dryly. "She lost the case, of course. I ruled against her because her claims were baseless. Ever since then, she's harbored a grudge. Thinks I ruined her reputation." Alex stared at his uncle, processing this revelation. "So she's not just targeting me because of the garage extension? This is personal for her?" "Exactly," Henry replied. "Karen thrives on control. When people challenge her authority or win against her, it drives her crazy. In her mind, you're not just breaking HOA rules, you're undermining her power. And that's something she can't tolerate." For the first time since the nightmare began, Alex felt a flicker of hope. If anyone understood how to navigate legal battles and stand up to bullies, it was Henry. The judge's presence alone made Alex feel less alone in this fight. But as much as he appreciated the support, he couldn't shake the feeling that taking on Karen would be an uphill battle. After all, she had the backing of the HOA board, money, and resources. What did Alex have besides determination and a pile of rubble where his garage used to be? Henry must have noticed the doubt creeping into Alex's expression. Leaning forward, he placed a reassuring hand on his nephew's shoulder. "Listen to me, Alex. You're not fighting this alone anymore. We'll build a case strong enough to shut her down, not just for your sake, but for the sake of everyone in this neighborhood who's been bullied by her." With those words, Henry rolled up his sleeves, literally and figuratively, and got to work. Over the next few hours, they sifted through every piece of evidence Alex had collected. They reviewed surveillance footage from a neighbor's security camera, which clearly showed Karen operating the forklift and destroying the garage. They examined copies of the HOA's guidelines, searching for loopholes or inconsistencies in their enforcement policies, and they drafted a list of potential witnesses, neighbors who might be willing to testify about Karen's abusive behavior. One name stood out immediately: Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who lived 2 doors down. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her as sweet and soft-spoken, but also fiercely observant. She often spent her evenings sitting on her porch watching the world go by. If anyone had seen or heard something useful, it was her. The next morning, Alex and Henry paid Mrs. Thompson a visit. She greeted them warmly, inviting them inside for coffee and cookies. Once they explained why they were there, her demeanor shifted. Her usually gentle smile turned into a look of quiet indignation. "That woman has gone too far this time," Mrs. Thompson declared, setting her cup down firmly. "I saw everything that night, the forklift, the destruction. It was barbaric, and I'm not the only one who feels that way. People are scared of her, yes, but deep down, they're angry too." Mrs. Thompson agreed to testify if it came to court, and she promised to reach out to other neighbors who might be willing to do the same. Her support was invaluable, giving Alex and Henry the confidence boost they needed to move forward. Back at home, Henry began outlining their strategy. The plan was twofold. First, they would file criminal charges against Karen for vandalism and destruction of property. Second, they would pursue a civil lawsuit seeking compensation for the damages caused by her actions. But Henry didn't stop there. He suggested digging deeper into the HOA's operations, looking for any signs of misconduct or misuse of funds. If they could expose systemic issues within the organization, it might weaken Karen's position even further. As they worked together, Alex couldn't help but marvel at how seamlessly he and Henry fell into a rhythm. Despite their rocky past, they shared a mutual goal and a growing bond. For years, Alex had resented his uncle, blaming him for being distant and overly critical during family disputes. But now, seeing Henry in action, Alex realized how much he admired the man's integrity and dedication to justice. By the end of the day, they had assembled a formidable case. Surveillance footage, witness statements, financial records. It was all there, meticulously organized and ready to present to the authorities. As Alex packed up the documents, Henry clapped him on the back. "You're doing the right thing, Alex," he said. "Standing up to bullies takes courage. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." But the real test was yet to come. Filing charges against Karen meant going public with the story, which carried its own risks. Word spread quickly in Willow Creek, and soon enough rumors began circulating about Alex's plans. Some neighbors cheered him on quietly, while others warned him to tread carefully. One particularly nervous resident even pulled him aside at the grocery store to whisper, "Be careful, Alex, Karen fights dirty." Despite the warnings, Alex refused to back down. With Henry by his side, he submitted the paperwork to the local police department and hired a pro bono attorney recommended by his uncle, a former colleague known for taking on high-profile cases involving abuse of power. The attorney, a sharp-witted woman named Lisa Monroe, immediately recognized the potential impact of the case. "This isn't just about you, Alex," Lisa said during their first meeting. "If we handle this right, we can set a precedent. Hold organizations like the HOA accountable for their actions. That's bigger than any one person." As preparations continued, Alex found himself reflecting on the journey so far. From the moment he'd moved into Willow Creek, he'd dreamed of creating a safe, happy home for his children. Instead, he'd stumbled into a war zone, pitting himself against one of the most formidable opponents imaginable. Yet somehow, he felt stronger now than ever before. He had allies, evidence, and a renewed sense of purpose. Most importantly, he had his family and his uncle to lean on. Little did Alex know the legal battle ahead would reveal secrets about Karen that no one could have anticipated. Documents surfaced during discovery that painted a shocking picture of greed, corruption, and betrayal within the HOA. And as the truth came to light, Karen's empire of intimidation began to crumble. The wheels of justice were turning, and for the first time in months, Alex allowed himself to believe that things might actually work out. For him, for his family, and for the entire neighborhood. All it took was standing up to a bully and having the right people in your corner. As the days turned into weeks, Alex and his team, Henry, Lisa Monroe, and a growing network of supportive neighbors, worked tirelessly to build an ironclad case against Karen Whitmore. The process was grueling but rewarding, as each new piece of evidence added weight to their argument. They knew they weren't just fighting for Alex anymore. They were fighting for accountability, fairness, and the soul of Willow Creek itself. The cornerstone of their case was the surveillance footage captured by Mrs. Thompson's security camera. It showed every detail of that fateful night. Karen, arriving in her car, climbing into the forklift, and systematically tearing apart Alex's garage. There was no denying what had happened. It was all right there on tape. But Henry insisted they needed more than just visual proof. "Videos are powerful," he said during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "But we need context. We need to show the court why this matters, not just for Alex, but for everyone." To strengthen their argument, Lisa dug into the HOA's bylaws and enforcement policies. What she uncovered was alarming. While the HOA claimed to operate transparently, many of its rules were vague or inconsistently applied. For example, some residents had made similar modifications to their properties without facing penalties, while others received fines for minor infractions like leaving trash cans visible from the street. This inconsistency suggested favoritism, or, worse, selective targeting. Lisa also requested financial records from the HOA, citing transparency laws that required such documents to be available to members upon request. At first, the board resisted, claiming confidentiality concerns. But when Lisa threatened legal action, they reluctantly handed over the files. What they revealed shocked everyone involved. Large sums of money labeled as miscellaneous expenses, with no clear explanation. Some transactions appeared to funnel funds directly into Karen's personal account. Armed with this information, Alex and his team realized they had stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple dispute over a garage extension. Karen wasn't just abusing her power within the HOA. She was potentially embezzling funds to finance her vendettas. This discovery gave them leverage, not only in Alex's case, but in exposing corruption within the organization. Meanwhile, Alex reached out to other neighbors who had faced similar treatment from Karen. One couple recounted how she had fined them repeatedly for planting flowers that didn't match the HOA-approved palette, even though the blooms were subtle and blended perfectly with the rest of the neighborhood. Another resident described being threatened with legal action after refusing to remove a birdhouse from their backyard tree. Slowly but surely, these stories formed a pattern of behavior that painted Karen as vindictive and power-hungry. With mounting evidence in hand, Lisa filed both criminal charges against Karen for vandalism and civil claims seeking compensation for damages. She also included allegations of misconduct within the HOA, arguing that the organization's leadership had failed to act responsibly or ethically. The goal was to shine a spotlight on systemic issues, ensuring that Karen couldn't hide behind the guise of enforcing rules. Karen, however, wasn't going down without a fight. When served with the lawsuit papers, she responded with characteristic arrogance. She hired a high-profile attorney named Richard Langston, known for his aggressive courtroom tactics and ability to sway juries. During pre-trial hearings, Langston argued that Karen's actions were justified because Alex had violated HOA guidelines. He dismissed the accusations of embezzlement as baseless attempts to smear her reputation. But Langston underestimated Lisa Monroe, and he certainly hadn't anticipated Judge Henry Carter stepping in as a character witness. During depositions, Henry provided testimony about Karen's history of abusive behavior, drawing on his experience presiding over her previous lawsuit. His words carried significant weight, given his credentials and impartiality. More importantly, he highlighted the broader implications of allowing unchecked authority figures like Karen to operate freely within organizations like the HOA. Power must always be balanced by accountability, Henry stated firmly during one deposition. When individuals abuse their positions to settle personal scores, it undermines trust, not just in the organization itself, but in the community as a whole. Langston tried to discredit Henry's testimony, accusing him of bias due to his familial connection to Alex. But Henry remained composed, calmly pointing out that his involvement stemmed from a commitment to justice, not nepotism. The judge's calm demeanor and sharp intellect left a lasting impression on everyone in the room. As preparations for the trial intensified, Alex found himself reflecting on the journey so far. What had started as a frustrating yet seemingly minor issue, a few extra feet of garage space, had spiraled into a full-blown battle against corruption and abuse of power. Along the way, he'd discovered strengths he didn't know he had: resilience, determination, and the courage to stand up for what was right. He'd also reconnected with his uncle, forging a bond that felt stronger and more meaningful than ever before. Emma and Jake noticed the change in their dad, too. Gone was the man who had once seemed overwhelmed and defeated. In his place stood someone confident, purposeful, and determined to make things better, for them, for their neighbors, and for anyone else who might find themselves targeted by someone like Karen. Despite the progress, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that Karen still held some cards close to her chest. She continued to attend HOA meetings, acting as if nothing was wrong. Her smug smile never wavered, and her comments grew, increasingly pointed. During one heated exchange, she accused Alex of orchestrating a witch hunt designed to ruin her life. Her theatrics drew mixed reactions from the crowd. Some rolled their eyes while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Behind closed doors, however, cracks began to show in Karen's polished facade. Neighbors reported seeing her pacing nervously outside her house late at night, clutching her phone as if waiting for bad news. Others claimed she'd become withdrawn, skipping social events she once dominated. Even Greg, the HOA board member who had initially tried to mediate, distanced himself from her, citing concerns about her judgment. Still, Karen refused to back down. On the eve of the trial, she sent Alex another threatening text. "You'll regret dragging me through this. Mark my words." This time, though, Alex didn't feel intimidated. Instead, he forwarded the message to Lisa, who immediately flagged it as potential evidence of harassment. The morning of the trial arrived, bringing with it a sense of anticipation that hung heavy in the air. Reporters gathered outside the courthouse, eager to cover the story of a small-town feud that had escalated into a national conversation about HOA abuses. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with activity as attorneys prepared their arguments and witnesses waited anxiously to take the stand. For Alex, the day felt surreal. As he sat beside Lisa, flipping through notes and reviewing exhibits one last time, he couldn't help but think about how far he'd come since moving to Willow Creek. Back then, he'd simply wanted a quiet place to raise his kids. Now, he was standing up to one of the most powerful figures in town and inspiring others to do the same. As the judge called the courtroom to order, Alex took a deep breath. He glanced at Henry, seated in the front row, who gave him an encouraging nod. Then he turned to Emma and Jake, sitting quietly in the gallery, their faces filled with pride. For the first time in months, Alex felt truly hopeful. No matter what happened next, he knew he was doing the right thing, not just for himself but for everyone who deserved to live in a fair and just community. The stage was set, the evidence was ready, and Karen Whitmore was about to face the consequences of her actions.